a Q&A, so you can actually ask me questions. So here we go. The way I structured it, and this is Beauford with the American writer James Jones in Delaney's studio in Paris. It's featured in Life magazine. I pretty much had to sell a kidney to afford the image permissions to include that in my book. But in essence, how I structured the book was to really look at the fullness of Delaney's creative life, to start with his life here in Knoxville, because as you know, he studied with Lloyd Branson, and people who talk about Delaney's life will, sort of nod to that he studied with Branson, and then, mention that he was in Boston, but really only start their real kind of examination or critique of his art when he arrives in New York. And I find that rather off-putting. I dedicated an entire chapter to Delaney's Knoxville period, and then I move essentially place by place, dedicating a chapter to each of the places that Delaney called home, with the exception of his Boston period, because there just wasn't enough work to stand as a chapter on its own. So again, a little bit of brief biography of Delaney, just to give you your bearings. He's born here in Knoxville on December 30th, 1901. Functionally makes it 1902, and then in 1923 he moves to Boston to keep his art education going. And when he's there, he spends a lot of time in the museum. He takes classes at various art schools, but the only art school that kept a record of him was a school called the Massachusetts Normal Art Academy, but we'll get there. And then in 1929, Delaney moved to New York. He landed pretty much right after the stock market crashed, so probably not the world's best timing. He went to Harlem, and then he pretty much immediately moved down to Greenwich Village, and he stayed there in New York, working as a professional artist. He gave up every non-art job that he had during the early 1930s and supported himself uniquely through his work. That meant that he was often really poor, and that also meant that a lot of his friends helped him financially, not out of, pity, but because they really believed in him and they really believed in the art. So I wanted to start with a chapter on Knoxville. Not only because I live here, but again, it's really been overlooked. And the thing that people always said when they were talking about Delaney and his kind of biography is they talked a lot about this portrait he supposedly made of his high school principal, Charles W. Kanzler. Now, if you're familiar with Kanzler, you know that he did a lot of other things other than being a high school principal. And this is actually a photograph from his autobiography, an autobiography that he published in 1939 and entitled 3 Generations, the Story of a Colored Family of Eastern Tennessee. So hearing about this Kanzler portrait, a lot of people talked about it, but nobody had really seen it. So it was a lot, like Sasquatch, a lot of talk and very few sightings. So I thought maybe there would be a way to track the portrait down, or at the very least to get some sense of where it was, what it looks like. So, good Mormon scholar that I am, I got on to Ancestry.com and ran Kanzler's family tree. And I found that Kanzler's great-grandson is named John Daves. So I found John Daves on LinkedIn and sent him a message saying, "Hello, my name is Mary Campbell, and I'm an art history professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I'm currently writing a book about the Knoxville-born artist Beauford Delaney, and it appears that his first portrait was of your great-grandfather, Charles W. Kanzler. No one has been able to find this portrait, and I was wondering if you might know where it's gone. Thank you, Mary Campbell." Which I'll tell you was a lot easier than cold calling people and saying, "Hey, I think your great-grandfather might have shot a little erotica at the same time that he was photographing Brigham Young." Right? You're not afraid to cold call people after you do that. So I assumed I would not hear back from Daves. And then 10 minutes later, I get, "Hi, Mary. I'm pleased to hear from you and to learn of your work. I know exactly where it is. It's currently on the wall in my dining room. I need to connect with you. I meant to redact that. Sorry. Warmest regards, John Daves. And then he was like, would you like to see a picture of me? And it was like, yes, I most certainly would. And he's living in Boston. I just booked a plane ticket to Boston. Here I come. So he has the paintings hanging on his wall. This is, from everything we know, Delaney's. What? I'm sorry, what?
Where'd it go?
Oh. Oh. All right, there went my narrative trajectory. We still got it? No.
Going the wrong way.
Okay.
I can help you.
Okay, thank you. Very sweet. Okay, I think I got this vaguely under control. All right, so I go to see the portrait, and it is what we think is the first portrait that Delaney ever made. He goes to Branson, he learns how to paint in oil, and then as a thank you, he paints this portrait of Charles Hansler. Because it turns out it wasn't Branson who discovered Delaney. The story you usually hear is that Delaney was working like in a shoe shine shop or something, and Branson discovered him. Instead, it was Hansler who took him to Branson, because Hansler, one of the things he was really invested in was what he called this network of Black excellence. So he dedicated really his life to looking out specifically for young Black Knoxvillians who had some sort of talent that could be cultivated and then sent into the larger world. So Delaney shows serious artistic promise from the beginning. Hansler looks at him and is like, we can develop this. We need to get you to Branson. And this urge to create really this network of Black excellence. And it was really strategic. There were times when Hansler would find not only a mentor or a job, but a well-situated spouse for one of his proteges. It was very serious and it was very professional. And it belongs to a tradition that we refer to as racial uplift. And in essence, the racial uplift tradition, it's a pre-civil rights attempt at, gaining racial equality, but rather than moving through overtly political channels, things like newspaper articles and laws and even protests, the idea behind racial uplift is that if certain Black people really adhere to these unimpeachable standards of white middle class or upper middle class sort of propriety, that then they would be accepted as full citizens. So the idea is that if you dress properly, if you have the right education, if you have the right job, and especially if you have the right domestic situation, which means married, monogamous, with children, not overly sexual, then you will be accepted into the body politic. And this is a very old tradition. It goes all the way back to these photographs of Frederick Douglass. And it actually has an echo. I don't know if you're familiar with Topocalypse, when Barack Obama wore the beige suit and everybody had to fit, right? He's outside bored. Because if you're Black in public, you better be looking right. And this portrait, and even three generations, absolutely comes out of this racial uplift tradition. You find other examples of it in these books, these little pamphlets that were being published in Knoxville at the time. And they're essentially these books of Black Knoxvillians, little biographies, photographs, really demonstrating the ways in which, again, they are adhering to and embodying just the most sort of, again, unimpeachable standards of white middle-class life. And the Delaney family, too, they adhered to this. And you can see this. This is a family portrait that was taken in 1906. I'm now terrified to use this thing. And so here we have Samuel Emery Delaney, Delaney's father, Samuel, his mother, Delia. This is Joseph Delaney.